Anxiety. It's a powerful force that can take hold of us and control our very lives. Anxiety is an aspect of fear, and it is sneaky. It often surfaces slowly, and before we know it, we're anxious as we wake, go through the day, and even anxious in our dreams. You can free yourself of toxic anxiety by facing the root causes and adjusting your mindset and behaviors. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I used to be fairly easygoing, but I've become increasingly anxious at home, work, and in social settings. I now have to self soothe, mainly with alcohol, to wind down and even socialize. Is this normal? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Friedemann Schaub, who will be sharing his expertise on anxiety and empowerment. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Friedman. I'm so excited to have you today. And before we get going, can you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Oh, that's a very good question. How much time do you have? Well, I think one thing that I heard from this real life question is something I didn't really have, which was the easygoingness, or I would say I lost my easygoingness very early in my life. So what made me me for many years was anxiety. I had a lot of anxiety. I saw it in many different ways and expressions: OCD, panic attacks, control issues, feeling that you can only be loved and accepted if you're perfect. So all of those expressions of anxiety, I had them and I struggled with them. And it took me quite some time to actually address them in the first place, because similar to that question, I also try to soothe myself with not so helpful methods. But what I found about anxiety is that it does really serve a bigger purpose. And so what makes me me is maybe that I love and I'm very passionate about showing people that they don't have to be afraid of their own feelings and they don't have to be afraid of their own anxiety, and really starting to befriend their emotions and rather than fighting them, and really just finding peace with ourselves, because my name, after all, is Friedemann, which means man of peace. So I guess it was put into my crib that helping others and myself to be at peace is my destiny.
Oh, such a beautiful introduction. So honest, so genuine, so vulnerable. I have two questions for you just about that piece. Did you know it was anxiety? When you were suffering from anxiety all of these years, at first, even as a child, were you aware it was anxiety?
Well, it's kind of interesting because it's not like anyone diagnosed me. It was more the symptom of, okay, I cannot sleep before a test, or I feel World War III going to break out if I don't straight all the carpets, or I am feeling my parents going to get a divorce if I'm not praying 100 times to God. I mean, so this is anxiety, my son. This is more like, okay, this is how I cope with that overwhelming feeling of being powerless and out of control. And since, it was in the 60s and 70s, so this is way before children were put on medication or sent to a therapist, especially not in Germany in the Black Forest. So it was more like, let's cope with this let's just live with this. You're maybe a little oversensitive here, than having any kind of plan on how to overcome it. And I lived with it fairly successfully because it, I believe, drives me to new heights and new achievements. And some weird way, like many people have anxiety, they believe without the anxiety, I'm losing my drive. And so it wasn't really something I was fighting at that time. It was more like something I was suffering from, and then trying to make myself feel better with all these different ways.
Okay, now I have an extra question, but before that extra question, let me go to my second question, which is, and I hope it's not too invasive, but you said you had coping mechanisms that were self-soothing mechanisms that weren't so helpful. What were some of your coping strategies? For example, straightening the carpets, having a little bit of
Right.
that. What were some of the other coping mechanisms?
Well, innocently, certainly one was taking cats in my bed. That always felt good
Mm.
before tests because they just plopped and started purring and snoring. So that calmed me down. But then it was more this, when you don't feel you are loved or you're not good enough, then you try to prove to yourself that you are lovable and good enough because you have straight A's or you are constantly taking care of all the people around you. And so these are these patterns that help us to cope with anxiety and help me to cope because it makes you feel better for a moment. It's like, oh, I have a little control over the situation. I have a little high because I have an achievement. It doesn't last very long, but that is a form of coping. Well, and then later on, when I was in the throngs of my residency and it was very stressful, lots of work, lots of pressure. Oh, a bottle of wine and good Bavarian fatty food that got me into a half coma. That always helped. And then I had a girlfriend at that time who was a philosophy student. And so I had this ability sometimes just to go into her world, just thinking about any kind of, philosophers, and she was also an art history student. So she was definitely the opposite of me. And it helped to just think about the things that were not really anything that had to do with my stressful black and white reality. So these are the ways I coped until I couldn't. There was a moment when I
Mm.
realized coping is not the option anymore because I felt so lost and so empty and so not myself. I didn't even know who I was. And I always tell people that that's a moment when I went into a church, hoping that God will somehow show me the way. And well, it didn't happen right away for sure, because I went and left and felt exactly the same. But later on, things unraveled and life showed up in kind of strange ways. And that's why we are talking now.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the piece about the bottle of wine and the comfort foods, because those are all such common. And, the question that we started with today, the listener's question, I hear that type of question, variants of that from clients all the time and people all the time. I, zone out with this, I zone out with that, self-soothe with that. Before I go to a party, I have to have a glass of wine and three more glasses of wine during the party and just to be okay, just to be able to not have my anxiety keep me running, leave me running out the door. And so I think it's so important for listeners to be able to hear you, a doctor, say, wait, these things affected me. They weren't healthy for me, and I found a way out of it. So, okay, now one more question about what you were saying. When you were growing up, were your parents, even though it was, a different time, were your parents supportive of what you were going through, or were they critical? Or did you feel seen even though you weren't sent to therapy and there weren't those, tools available? How did you feel as far as how your parents were dealing with your anxiety?
Well, they weren't because they were
Mm.
anxious themselves and they had their own problems that they were focused on, especially themselves, each other, and their work. They were both doctors as well. And so the hope was just that I will become a doctor too. So when I had bad grades, they did everything they could to scare me enough to then sit down and get good grades. So no, it wasn't really very helpful, their method
Oh,
at
not
all.
at all. Oh my goodness. It sounds like it would exacerbate the anxiety. Certainly.
Well, actually created it, I would say, in many ways. I'm not blame them because, I'm very grateful because I did really get so many insights about how it feels, what can it do to you, and what you shouldn't do. So I'm not really having any kind of blame or regrets. One thing is though, and that's what I often tell people when they have this anxiety from their childhood, sometimes they really think, and that's what I thought too, oh, I'm just an anxious child. This is who I was. But there was a version of me that was not anxious. There was a version of me before when it became serious, which was as I entered into high school, where it was super easygoing, just like that question, and happy-go-lucky, and saw the world just in all its magical expressions. I didn't think about a math test. I didn't think about having to study because the world was just so fun, and I was really truly fulfilled in that way. And that is a piece of me that got totally lost. So when I overcame this anxiety by really addressing what was underneath, I also found that peace again. So that's the beauty about working on your anxiety, that it's not just about let's turn the heat down, let's stop feeling so bad. It's like you're gonna remember things and aspects about yourself that you may have forgotten, and that really come rushing back in, and I'm so grateful for that.
Absolutely. And I'm a believer too that blaming or shaming one's parents or upbringing, there's never really an upside to that. There's an upside to understanding it and looking at the roots, but being able to say, and as you said, the other part of that is that you were able to find that innocent, pure child in yourself. You knew that there was a part of you. You didn't come into the world, this anxious, uptight being. You actually found that really peaceful side of yourself and went back to it and really breathed into it. And now we have you as you are now, evolving and becoming more and more peaceful and helping other people. So that leads me to another piece where you did touch on it when you were talking, and this does tie back to a question that many people have. When you talked about there is a level of anxiety that helps me produce what we tend to call optimal anxiety, right? And often we think we need anxiety or a lot of it, to that adrenaline surge, that fight or flight response to really produce and do more and be more. Yet it often works against us. So, can you talk a little bit more about how you learn to find that sweet spot of anxiety where there is that optimal anxiety, just that nudge that allows us to get up and get out of bed and do the things we need to do?
Well, I don't even know that there is an optimal anxiety for me, because I do feel that anxiety has been replaced more by joy and excitement. So it's a similar feeling, but it doesn't feel like something bad's going to happen if I'm not performing or producing or any of those things. It feels more like a desire or a purpose, and I find that is the optimal, for me at least, to not really need that stress in order for me to feel like, yes, I am someone of a productive, contributing member of society. I don't think that's very healthy. What I notice is just that it drains the energy. It really is something like climbing a mountain, and then the next day the same mountain is in front of you and you have to climb it again, and it never feels like you arrive. And I rather see this, as the creation of life or a journey of life. And so I love hiking. So going on, every day as, oh, there is another experience, there is another creation, there is another contribution. It just feels much more organic, and it feels much more empowering than needing this little inner slave driver that says, well, remember, if you are not really doing this, or if you're failing here, or if you're not really showing up there, then that means you are not worthy, or you're not good enough, you're not advance. I mean, some people may just not feel that joy and purpose, and they feel like more driven by this what if and this stress. But for me, I'm trying to live more with this idea that life is to be enjoyed and not life is to be suffered.
I love this. And I just touching back to the term that we often use in the world of psychology, the optimal anxiety, and to harness that optimal anxiety, just that nudge. And I absolutely adore how you reframed it to wait a second. We don't need to have this optimal anxiety nudge us out of bed or nudge us to the next project. We can reframe that to be, which actually what is what motivates me as well, which is why I write about, my book, my first book, Joy from Fear. Why? Joy. And so and I think that that's where you and I are very deeply aligned. The idea of let's, even if no matter what term we use, but I do prefer your term, by the way, excitement. What about if we have an optimal level of excitement that gets us out of bed, that gets us to that next task, that gets us to that hike or playing, with our pets or being with our partner or our kids? What about if we reframe it and say, okay, let's just let go of anxiety altogether, unless it's telling us that there's an intruder at the door, right? Or a dog that's about to bite us. We want fear then, we want some anxiety then. But in other situations, you're saying, wait, let's just slow it down and really look at finding joy and excitement and let those be our motivators. Did I get you right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, this reframes it also in regards to what you expect, because there is an anticipation when you're driven by anxiety that what you hope for is to get it done so that you don't have to feel anxious anymore. There is not the, oh, I'm looking forward to it because what I'm getting is a reward back, a reward of an experience, a reward of maybe some smile of the people you work with, or maybe the animals are wagging their tails when you feed them. It's just there's a whole different mindset around that what you do every day because you are looking forward to that experience. You don't necessarily have to be specific, just gonna be open. Oh, is something nice gonna happen? I had a client once and she just told me the secret to her aging gracefully and joyfully is that she every day says to herself, oh, I wonder what will pleasantly surprise me today. And with that mindset of, I'm going to have a pleasant surprise. I know it. I know it. I mean, of course, when you have that mindset, you interpret anything as such. And what a wonderful way to gift yourself. And that's the same with, oh, I'm excited about this day. I wonder what's going to be good about it. It's different than saying, well, yeah, I have to because the optimal anxiety is pushing me. It just feels very different.
Absolutely, it feels very different. And you're the author of two books, The Empowerment Solution and The Fear and Anxiety Solution. And so you're perfect, the perfect expert for this topic. So let's go back to the question that came up today. This person who is feeling very anxious, increasingly so, self-soothing, and we're basically you're advising, wait a second, reframe things. Try to find some joy in the day. Try to reframe things, adjust your mindset so that you're looking for the excitement and the pleasure and the joy in the day instead of being on the lookout for dangers, for what might come to harm you or go wrong. Now, that might sound like a very simple fix, but it goes very deep, isn't it? It really, A, it's harder than it sounds, and B, it's not, if once you get used to it, it's not really as superficial as it sounds. It really starts changing how you see the world and respond to the world and interact with the world. Could you explain how that works?
Well, the way, I mean, I don't know the age of this person and I don't know anything, but basically what I could say from experience with other people that had similar experiences from, being all easygoing to anxious at their 40s or 50s. I think the interesting phenomenon is that the anxiety is coming up at a time when everything seems to be okay. So there is no problems. There's health is okay, relationship is okay, work is okay. Everything seems to be like on the roll. And then all of a sudden the anxiety comes up, and I work a lot with the subconscious. And so for me, the interpretation is that this is the perfect time when there is quietness, when there is no distraction, to bring up unresolved issues, to bring up maybe these old beliefs that are still not addressed, the old traumas or emotional events that haven't been resolved, where when everything is quiet and there is no need to stress about anything, that subconscious says, okay, now let's look inside, because you have done everything outside okay. Everything, the ducks are in the row, the garden is watered, the house is built. So let's look inside because you're not yet completely whole. And so that's an opportunity to really say, well, what am I actually thinking? What is the anxiety circling around? What's the theme? And where may this theme come from? And in this case, maybe the theme is, I don't really feel safe. Maybe the shoe gonna drop. Maybe everything's gonna just fall apart. Maybe something's gonna be taken away from me. And then going back and realizing, well, that stems probably from the time when my beloved grandmother all of a sudden died, or when we had to move and I had to leave all my best friends, or there may be traumas that when everything is going well, are questioning, can it really last? Do I really deserve it? Is the world really running like that? And that is something to explore and to work with. And again, that can be a wonderful opportunity.
I completely agree with you how so many we all experience either very minor traumas, mild traumas, or major traumas as we move through life. And when they're not processed and when they're not, accepted, explored, moved through, they do tend to rule us on a very unconscious level. And so for the individual who wrote in, who, represents many people, which is why I think it's such a terrific question, and they're listening to this podcast and saying, yeah, but I can't really figure it out. I haven't had a major trauma. No one tried to murder me or attack me. And, my life is okay. But they might start looking toward the back, toward their history and say, yeah, but mom and dad fought a lot when I was growing up, or I was bullied a little bit in childhood or a lot in childhood. I really felt like I had to retract, or, there's more percolating around here, but I can't find a specific trauma. What would you say to the person who's starting to have the courage to look inside themselves and at their history, and they again don't have a specific trauma, but they're feeling this unsettling sense that childhood was not a great or safe place all the time? What would you say?
Mm. Well, I don't believe necessarily that one trauma is always the culprit. I do
Hmm.
believe it's more like the succession of events that rattle us, moments that were just a little startling, moments that everything was nice and peaceful, and all of a sudden lightning was striking. And those events, I invite people to write them down. Just, go through 10-year increments. First 10 years, what was significant in those 10 years? What happened? What would you say is something that somehow, made you either a little bit shaken up or affected you, or you just thinking about feel still an emotion? Maybe you had a dog and that dog got run over, or maybe you lost, a good friend who did actually move away. And so you felt, that pain of the loss. Just go through the emotional experience until now, all these 10-year increments. And what you're going to see, or what you can see, is often a theme. It's almost like what you remember is like the red thread through life that tells you it's a lot about loss, or it's a lot about feeling blindsided, or it's a lot about feeling it's up to me to make things happen and I cannot really trust anyone. And so, whatever those themes are, those themes are probably still alive and maybe the cause of this anxiety.
I love how you frame this with the red thread. That once you start, and there may be more than one theme, but I
Right.
agree with you. For a lot of people, it ends up being a theme of abandonment or rejection or worthlessness, being criticized so much throughout life that you feel like you're never enough, being driven to succeed, to perform, to get the straight A's over and over again. And so all of these can lace together to create that, what you're calling that red line. And so for this, the question today, and for listeners, you and I both believe in the power of journaling and creating these timelines. Again, not to blame anyone, it doesn't do any good. Not to blame, but to start objectively seeing all the I call them breadcrumbs, to start seeing all of the breadcrumbs that were left along the way that led up to. And that's why, I talk about anxiety being sneaky and pernicious. It sneaks in through all of these little cracks. And before we wake up, we wake up one day and go, oh my God, I'm anxious. I'm having panic attacks. I'll have people write into me and say, I'm, a strong man and I had a panic attack and there's no reason for it. Explain this. Or, I'm a great woman and I'm starting having panic attacks. This doesn't seem fair. I'm very embarrassed. I'm very sad. So what would you say to the people you having had panic attacks? What would you say when this panic attacks, of course, are, big manifestation of anxiety that's become, a very big knock at the door of the psyche? What would you say to help those who are suffering from panic attacks?
I would say congratulations, because the panic attack is your wake up call. It's your moment to realize that there is something that needs attention inside of you. Don't be afraid. Basically, the panic attack, just like in my case, is simply a sign that you were probably having anxiety before, but you were not listening. You were maybe just ignoring it, pushing it down, pushing it away, trying to cope. And at some point, your mind just said, no, I don't have that. I need you to pay attention. Now, like me, so many people, now even more than 50 years ago, are only defined by their external environment. They only focus on what's around them. There is no focus inside. There is not even that, boredom of, well, TV doesn't run anymore after 10 o'clock. Everything is quiet. Well, I guess I'm here with my thoughts. That doesn't exist anymore. There is only distraction and attention on the outside. And for me, that's the reason why so many of us have been dealing with more and more anxiety, because there is an anxiety when we are not at home with ourselves, when we are disconnected from ourselves, when we are living 6 feet outside of ourselves. So I would say this is your chance and your invitation to get to know yourself better, to find your way home in yourself, and to let go of all the things that you thought define you or identify you, and realize there is so much more to you than you ever thought is possible. And you're probably going to find a lot of treasures that, looking back, you're going to thank your anxiety that you found them. Because without the anxiety, you wouldn't even have looked for them.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for highlighting that anxiety, when we start looking at it, when we start seeing it as a messenger, right? As a messenger. It's the whole premise of my first book, Joy from Fear, right? It becomes a messenger. And when we see it as a messenger and we listen to the knock at the door, whether it's low grade panic, medium grade, chronic, chronic anxiety, whatever it is, when we start listening. And, behind me in my office is Carl Jung, a version of one of his quotes, which is, he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. And that's what you're promoting, is this idea of using this anxiety or panic, however it's manifesting, as an opportunity to slow down, let go of the distractions, the TV shows, the movies, the noise in your ears, the constant, not that music is great, but sometimes we use it as a distraction, the socialization, over socializing, whatever it is, and really just turn inward and listen to what the anxiety is trying to tell us. Did I get that right?
Well, we are kindred spirits, absolutely. And that's so nice to hear because I do think there's still so often anxiety seen as a culprit, as the enemy, as maybe even a weakness. And it's such an opportunity. I mean, my anxiety changed my life. If I would have not listened to my panic attacks when I was in cardiology, I probably would have still stayed in cardiology and probably would have still drank a bottle of wine, eat a lot of Bavarian food, and have my own heart attack. So I don't think that the anxiety wanted to hurt me. It wanted to help me and maybe even to save me from myself. So I am grateful. And most people that are willing to go on this journey of finding themselves and listening to the messenger are grateful. And it's a change. Anxiety is not a little tiny force like an itch. It's something big because something big can also happen. So, big things make us aware of big opportunities. Big emotions are there for a reason. And I think, and I always compare it to pain. Pain, physical pain, is also often condemned as why me and so useless. But then it does tell you something about, well, you are out of balance, or you have an inflammation, or you have a disease. It needs to be addressed. Emotions are in some ways like the pain of the mind, the pain of our deeper selves. It just needs to be seen as a symptom and not as a problem.
I agree with you so completely and fully, and it is not lost on me that I was thinking as you were saying that you did not become a cardiologist, where you would have helped one physical heart at a time, one surgery after, usually a lifetime of buildup of issues, right? And here you are a cardiologist for the psyche, a cardiologist for the psyche who is going to prevent the heart attacks from ever occurring, because you're helping people see, wait a second, when we attend to the psychological heart of the self, when we really place a premium on knowing the self, caring for the self, listening to the self, then the body, mind, and spirit all work in concert to create overall well-being. So you are an exemplary cardiologist of the psyche. I love it, helping people move through fear, move through anxiety, and create empowerment. I could talk to you for another huge space of time. We will have you back again. We've already talked about it because you have so much to offer listeners. I'm so excited. So, Dr. Friedemann, I am just so grateful for you sharing your time, your expertise, your wisdom, your vulnerability, your courage with me and our listeners today. Where can our listeners find you?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be one of the first. So this is great. I really feel very honored. Well, finding is easy. So my website is drfriedman.com. It's maybe spelled out in the description, but it's DRFRIEDE, very important, DEMA2N.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Dr. Friedemann Schaub. You can find me on Instagram. And I do work with clients in one-on-one breakthrough program sessions. And I offer also a video course, which helps people to go through their anxiety root causes to empowerment. I have this, you mentioned before, the Fear and Anxiety book, and also the new Empowerment Solution book. And that book will be actually soon out as an audiobook on Audible with me as the narrator, which I'm really excited because in my earlier life, I wanted to become an actor. So that was cool for me to finally have the opportunity to do a little bit of acting. So that's going to be fun. And yeah, go to the website and find a lot of tools that can help you already to address some of those anxiety symptoms and go deeper to find actually what the message is all about.
Thank you so much. So, listeners, you know where to find Dr. Friedemann. And as a wrap up quote that I have from our wonderful guest, here it is: we have infinite potential to heal, grow, and thrive. And so, with that, thank you again so much for being with us today, Dr. Friedemann. It has been truly a joy and a privilege and a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.